The morning my life cracked open started like any other Wednesday in Manhattan. Gray and a little too loud for my taste, with the sound of a delivery truck backing up under my apartment windows. And the radiator knocking like it was annoyed to still be alive. I was sitting at my kitchen table with a mug of coffee that had already gone, lukewarm, laptop open, inbox full of emails about investment opportunities, and invitations I did not really care about. I had sold my company, a little cybersecurity firm called Harborgate Security, a few months earlier for $275 million, and yet the apartment around me looked the same as it always had. Same secondhand table, same chipped blue mug, same dent in the wall from when my brother had shoved me into it during an argument when we were kids. Nobody in my family knew about the sale. As far as they were concerned, I was still the weird tech daughter who lived in the city and spent too much time on her computer. That was how they liked it. As long as I did not ask for anything and stayed out of the way, they were comfortable. If you are listening to this right now, I am honestly curious what you are doing. So many women write in and tell me they listen to these stories while they fold laundry, or walk the dog, or drive home from work. When this happened to me, I was just sitting there in my tiny Manhattan kitchen in a baggy t-shirt, barefoot on the cold tile, staring at my phone while my coffee went cold. If you feel like it, tell me in the comments what you are doing while you hear this. It makes me feel a little less alone when I imagine you there. My name is Rachel Cole. I was 34 years old that morning, and I truly believed that the hard part of my life was behind me. I had built something from nothing. I had survived more sleepless nights than I could count, and I thought maybe, just maybe, my family would finally see me as more than a difficult daughter. Then my phone buzzed. It was the specific vibration I had assigned to my mom. Short, sharp, insistent. I let it buzz once, twice, then turned it over. On the screen was a text from her. There was no greeting. No, how are you? No little heart emoji like she sometimes put on messages to my brother. Mom had written that Matt's wedding is going to be very intimate this summer, just family. Underneath that line was a photo of a printed guest list, spread out on what looked like the dining table back at their house in Albany. Names were written in neat blue ink. My parents, my brother, his fiancée, her parents. A line of aunts, uncles, cousins. And there, halfway down the page, was my own name. Rachel. Thick red ink slashed through it like a scar. I stared at it for a long time. My first thought was that it had to be some kind of joke, some tone-deaf attempt at humor. My mom had a streak of what she liked to call honesty, and what I had long since learned to translate as cruelty with good manners. Inside my chest, something folded in on itself. It was not the sharp explosion of hurt you feel the first time someone betrays you. That kind of pain belonged to younger versions of me. What I felt instead was a deep, slow compression, like a heavy book closing on a story I had never been allowed to finish. I did not text back. I did not ask what this meant or why my name was crossed out. I just watched the little bubbles sit there under the photo where she had typed nothing else. It was deliberate. That was what hit me first. The way she had chosen to show me, not with words, but with a picture of my own name erased. My mind started to supply all the sentences I had heard about myself over the years. Rachel makes everything intense. Rachel is hard to predict. Rachel does not know how to read the room. I could almost hear my mom saying to someone that the wedding had to be easy, had to be smooth, had to be perfect. My phone buzzed again. Another message from her. She said that she hoped I understood that this is about keeping things simple for Matt and Julia, and that I should not take it personally. That line made me laugh. A small, bitter sound in my empty kitchen. I should not take it personally that my own family had crossed my name off the guest list for my brother's wedding. I put the phone face down on the table and tried to drink my coffee. It was stone cold. The radiator hissed. Outside, a siren wailed and then faded. For a moment, I let myself imagine standing in their backyard in Albany. Under the tent they would surely rent, holding some plastic flute of cheap champagne, while everyone fussed over the happy couple. I pictured my mom's tight smile and my dad asking if I was still doing that computer thing. Then another thought slid in behind it. My grandmother. I picked up my phone again, opened my contacts, and tapped on the name I had saved as Grandma. It rang 3 times before she answered. I heard the familiar little pause as she fumbled with the button. Then her voice came through, thin but warm, like light through old lace. My grandma's name is Irene. She was 78 that year, living alone in the same little house in Albany where she had raised my dad. She asked how I was and if I was eating enough, and I asked her what she was baking and if her knees were still bothering her when it rained. We did that dance for a minute, both of us circling something we had not named yet. Finally, she asked me if I had picked out a dress for the wedding yet. The word wedding hit me right in the throat. I swallowed and tried to keep my voice steady. I asked her what Mom had said to her about it. There was a tiny silence on the line, just the rustle of her sleeve against the receiver. Then she told me that my mom and dad had stopped by the week before with a folder full of venues and flower samples. They had told her that the wedding was going to be small, that they wanted to keep it to the young folks, and that travel would be too hard on her. What with the wheelchair and all. She tried to make it sound like she was not upset. My grandma has that old-fashioned pride, the kind that will bleed before it complains. But then she said something that made my vision blur. She told me that my mom had said they did not want a wheelchair in the photos, that it would throw off the look they were going for. The theme was soft garden romance, and they wanted everything to feel light. I sat there with the phone pressed to my ear, staring at the crack in the tile under my bare foot. A wheelchair in the photos would ruin the theme. That was the reason they had given the woman who had babysat my brother free when he was little, so my mom could go to yoga. The woman who had sat in hospital waiting rooms with my dad's mother when she was sick. The woman who had sent me $20 bills and birthday cards when I was in college and living off instant noodles. I asked Grandma if she had gotten any formal invitation, a card, an email, anything. She laughed a little and said, "No, baby. Nobody sends invitations to the one they decided not to invite." Something in her voice broke on that last word. Not loudly, just the tiniest crack. It was enough. All at once, the humiliation I had felt seeing my own name crossed out shifted into something colder. It was one thing for them to decide I was too much trouble, too intense, too whatever they were saying about me behind my back. I had made a certain kind of uneasy peace with that over the years. But going after her, turning my grandmother into an inconvenience, a prop to be removed from the frame so their pictures would look prettier, that was a line I did not even know they were capable of crossing. I took a slow breath. I asked her what she was doing for the rest of the day. She said she had planned to bake a pie and maybe watch some old crime show reruns. She tried to make her voice light. She told me not to worry about her, that she understood that young people wanted their fun, and she had had her time. I felt my jaw clench so hard it hurt. I looked around my kitchen at the laptop full of numbers that would have made my dad's eyes pop out of his head, at the simple white subway tiles I had picked out by myself after the sale went through, because it was the one small indulgence that felt safe. And I realized something very clearly. They had made a decision about who belonged in their picture. I could not change that. I could not force my way into their frame without losing more of myself than they were worth. But I could choose to paint a very different picture somewhere else. I told my grandma that I was going to come up and see her, not for an afternoon, not for a quick visit squeezed in between meetings. I told her to keep her phone on and maybe think about where in the world she would go. If she could go anywhere, if nobody told her she was too old or too much trouble. She laughed at that, a real laugh this time, surprised and a little shy. She asked what I was up to, calling her with that tone in my voice. I said I was tired of watching them decide who was worthy of love and celebration. I said if they did not want us in their story, maybe it was time we wrote our own. I did not tell her yet what I was planning. That would come later. At that moment, all I said, very softly, was that I was coming to Albany. If you were sitting where I was that morning, looking at your name crossed out on your own family's guest list, hearing that your grandmother's wheelchair did not fit the theme, what would you have done next? I sat there with the phone still warm in my hand, the silence of my kitchen pressing in on me. And the next thing I remember, I was already grabbing my keys. By the time the elevator doors slid open in my building, I had made up my mind. I was driving to Albany. I did not care about meetings or deadlines or the stack of papers on my table. There was only one thing I needed to do, and it was get to my grandma. The traffic getting out of Manhattan was its usual grind. Cars packed together on the FDR, brake lights blinking like a line of tired red eyes. I eased into the slow-moving river of it and let my mind drift in that strange mix of automatic driving and sharp memory. I had made that drive so many times growing up. Back then, I used to keep my forehead pressed to the passenger window while Dad insisted on talk radio and Mom tapped through her planner. They were always heading to something they said was important. A school event for my brother, a sports banquet, a family obligation that I somehow was never the center of. My brother Matt had always been the golden one. From the time we were little, he could do no wrong. If he got caught lying, he was protecting someone. If he skipped homework, he was overworked. If he yelled at me or barged into my room or shoved me into a wall, he was just having a moment, and I needed to be more understanding. Meanwhile, everything I did was intense or too much or needed to be toned down. I used to pretend it did not hurt. I used to tell myself that it was normal for families to pick a favorite like they were choosing the winner of a talent show. But sitting there behind the wheel that day, with the Hudson River sliding past on my left, I realized I had been carrying that ache for so long that it felt like a part of my spine. It was dull most days, and then something like this wedding thing would slam into it, and the whole structure of it would flare with heat. I remembered something that hit harder than I expected. It was the spring of 2009. I had been 19, a sophomore at a small state college, running on caffeine and ambition. My grades were good. My plans were big. My grandma, who had always been my quiet champion, had saved for years to give me a little startup fund, $32,000. She had told me once in a soft voice that she had been feeding that account, little by little since I was a kid. Birthday money, overtime pay from the hospital, refund checks she never spent, all for me. That money never reached me. I did not know the truth back then. My dad had called me one afternoon and told me they needed to borrow the money for a short while because my brother needed some special treatment for a health scare. He talked fast and gentle, like he was explaining something to a child. He said I would get it back by the fall. He said it was for the family. He said it would not change my plans. I remember sitting on the edge of my dorm bed with the cheap mattress springs creaking under me while he explained everything in that calm voice of his. I was a good daughter back then. Maybe too good. I said, of course, take what you need. I understand. The fall came and went. Then winter. Then the next year. Then the year after that. At some point, I stopped asking about the money because every time I brought it up, my mom would sigh and say things were tight, or we will talk about it later, or can you please not make things harder on your dad right now? Eventually, I decided maybe my grandma had changed her mind about giving me the money. Maybe she did not think I needed it. The thought stung every time it crossed my mind. But I swallowed it because what else was I supposed to think? When my first attempt at starting a business failed 5 years later, I was broke in a way I had never been before. I was eating rice and beans, turning off lights in empty rooms to save pennies, sleeping 3 hours a night because failure kept replaying in my head. I remember one night calling my grandma just to hear her voice. She asked if I was doing all right financially. I lied and said I was fine. She asked again. I lied again. Then she asked if my parents had ever paid her back for the loan. I said, what loan? She went quiet. That was the moment I felt something in me tilt, like a picture frame knocked loose on a wall. But she did not explain, and I did not push, and the conversation ended there. The memory tightened my chest as I drove. The highway straightened into a long, empty stretch. The sky was a washed-out winter blue. Up ahead, a truck kicked a trail of dust off its tires as it merged. I kept driving, my mind jumping between moments like someone flipping pages too fast. There were other memories, too. My mom called me dramatic in front of relatives when I cried at my own graduation because I was so relieved to be done. My dad forgot to pick me up from school and told me I should have reminded him. Matt showed up late to Thanksgiving and got a hero's welcome while I had spent half the day basting a turkey I had bought with my own money because Mom said she was too tired to cook. I had never said any of it out loud, not to them, Not even to myself. Not until that morning when I heard my grandma say that a wheelchair would ruin the theme of my brother's wedding. The car felt too small for all of it. I cracked open the window and let the cold air rush in. It hit me like a reset button, sharp enough to sting, honest enough to ground me. I looked out at the thin line of trees blurring past, branches bare and bony against the sky, and I said quietly into the empty car that they could erase me from there. Pictures if they wanted to. But they were not going to erase her. I felt something settle inside me. Not anger, exactly. Something steadier, a kind of resolve that had weight to it. I had been alone before. I had survived bigger storms in my 20s, when my business crashed and thought my life was over. I could survive this too, but my grandma had spent her whole life loving people who rarely loved her, and I would not let her spend her last years believing she was an inconvenience. As the sign for Albany appeared in the distance, the road curving gently toward the exit that led to her little street, I tightened my grip on the steering wheel. They could have me, or they could have their perfect garden wedding with no wheelchairs and no difficult daughters. They were not getting both. That truth settled into me so firmly that it felt like a second spine. By the time I turned onto my grandmother's block, the winter light had gone pale and thin across the roofs. I could see her lace curtains shifting in the front window as my car rolled to a stop. She had been watching for me. I walked up the ramp, heart heavy in a way I could not show her. When she opened the door, she tried for a smile, but the moment she saw my face, it crumbled. Her eyes always gave her away. I stepped forward and hugged her carefully, feeling her small frame fold into me the way it always had, like she had been waiting for someone to hold her up. "You made good time," she said, voice trembling. I followed her inside. The house smelled like cinnamon and old wood and something warm I had never been able to name. Everything looked the same, even though she moved slower now, using her hand on the wall for support. She poured tea for both of us, and we sat at the kitchen table that had held 30 years of our managers' conversations. Good and bad. I asked quietly what exactly my parents said about the wedding. She tried to make her voice light, but it came out thin. They said the wedding would be very small, that standing for long periods would be too much for me. And your mom said, well, she said the wheelchair might be difficult with the photographer's aesthetic. I closed my eyes, because if I spoke right away, something ugly would escape. I asked her if that was truly the reason. She hesitated, then nodded, her mouth trembling. Something inside me twisted so tightly it felt like it might snap. But that was not why I had driven 2 hours without thinking. There was a conversation we had left unfinished years ago, something that had hovered between us like smoke. I could not pretend anymore. Remember when you asked if my parents ever paid you back? The loan you mentioned on the phone years ago? Her eyes dropped, and I saw the fear there. The shame someone else had placed in her hands and told her to carry. I said softly, "Tell me everything. I can take it." The silence that followed was not empty. It was filled with 15 years of something she had never been allowed to say out loud. When she finally spoke, her voice had the delicate shake of someone touching a wound that never healed. It was 2008. Matt met a girl who worked at the diner by the interstate. Sweet girl. She tried to do the right thing. When she found out she was pregnant, she came to your parents because she thought honesty mattered. I felt my pulse climb into my throat. Your mom told her she would ruin Matt's life, that he had a future, that she needed to think long and hard before making a permanent mistake. They brought her to a lawyer, papers were signed, and she was told to leave the state and not contact Matt again. I felt cold all over. She did not want to sign, Grandma said. She cried through the whole meeting. She kept asking if Matt knew, if he cared, but your parents told her this was what grown-ups had to do. They said they were protecting everyone involved. My voice barely worked when I asked where the money for the settlement came from. Gran looked at me with eyes that had never once lied to me, and I knew the answer before she spoke. "It was the money I saved for you," she whispered. $32,000, every bit of it. The world narrowed to a single pulse in my ear. She said your dad told me it was temporary. He said the girl needed help leaving town and starting over. He said they would put the money back the moment they could. But they never did. Every time I asked, your mom told me not to bring it up again. Said it would upset the family. That I had to think of Matt's future. She said you would be fine without it. That you were smart and driven and would land on your feet. I could not speak. For a long moment, all I could hear was the soft tick of the clock above the stove and the faint sound of her swallowing tears. I followed her wordlessly as she went to her bedroom. She reached to the top shelf of her closet, hands shaking, and pulled down an old tin box. Inside, under a folded doily, was a long white envelope. She handed it to me. I opened it and found the promissory note. $32,000. My dad's signature. My mom's signature. A repayment deadline that had expired 14 years ago. Behind it were bank statements showing the withdrawal. The balance dropped to almost nothing. My future was erased with a pen stroke and a lie. You were never supposed to see that, Grandma said quietly. They told me to keep my mouth shut. For the family's image. That was the phrase they used. They said if I told you, you would blow everything up. They said it would hurt Matt. They said I had to choose the family over you. Her voice cracked. I thought you would be fine. I thought you did not need it as badly as he needed his life to stay neat. And then, when you struggled later, when your first business fell apart, I thought maybe you were angry at me. I wanted to tell you so badly, but your mom said it would only make things worse. She looked at her hands, twisting a tissue until it tore. I have carried this for 15 years, she whispered. I am so tired. Something hot rose in my chest, but it was not anger anymore. It was grief. Grief for every night I had gone hungry building that business. Grief for every time I had thought my grandmother did not care. Grief for the way she had been silenced in her own family. I put the envelope back into the tin, closed the lid gently, and took her hand. Grandma, I said, this was never your fault. She shook her head, but I squeezed her fingers until she looked up at me. They did this, not you. They lied to both of us. They took from both of us. And now they want you to believe you are bad for a picture. I am done letting them control your worth. She stared at me with this mixture of relief and fear and hope I had not seen before. What are you going to do? She asked softly. I felt the decision settle over me like a warm coat. Solid. Certain. First, we are getting you out of this house. You deserve a world bigger than this. You deserve something beautiful. You deserve a moment that is yours, not borrowed or stolen or hidden. She laughed through her tears, shaky and uncertain. Where would we go? She asked. I looked at her with a certainty that surprised even me. Grandma said, we are going to Paris. Her lips parted, the breath catching in her throat. She blinked, like she thought she had misheard. Paris, she repeated, almost a whisper. I nodded. We are not asking permission. We are not waiting to be included. We are choosing ourselves. They can have their perfect little wedding with their perfect little picture. We are going to write our own. For a moment, she just stared at me, her eyes filling again. But this time it was not sorrow. It was something lighter, something that looked like air after a long time underwater. Paris, she said again, letting the word roll slowly off her tongue like she was tasting it. Yes, I said. Paris. She closed her eyes and let out a breath that sounded like years of holding. Everything in finally slipping loose. All right, she whispered, her voice trembling. All right, Rachel, let's go. And that was the moment everything shifted. Not with anger, not with revenge, with freedom. A new story beginning in the same small kitchen where the old one had started to die. I took her hand again, feeling the warmth of her palm. Paris. It was no longer a dream. It was a promise I fully intended to keep. I stayed with Grandma through the evening, help her pack a small overnight bag, and making sure she ate something more than the crackers she usually nibbled on when she was upset. She kept touching my arm every few minutes, as if to check that I was real, and that Paris was not something she had imagined out of exhaustion and hope. I tucked her into bed around 10 and sat on the old floral couch with my laptop open on my knees. The house was quiet. Too quiet. the kind of quiet that lets old hurts creep out of the corners. I pushed past it and started planning, letting the structure of logistics calm me the way it always had when I built my business. Flights first. I searched for first-class seats out of JFK that left within the next day or two. Prices flashed across the screen, eye-watering numbers that would have made my parents faint, but to me, they looked like freedom. I booked 2 seats on a morning flight. The confirmation email landed in my inbox with a soft chime. After that, I found a hotel in Paris, close to Place de la Concorde. One with elevators wide enough for a wheelchair and rooms large enough for her to move comfortably. I booked a suite overlooking the street, the kind of room she had probably only ever seen in movies. When I clicked confirm, something warm spread through my chest. Next, I called my best friend, Emily, the person who had been with me since the earliest days of Harborgate. Security. She answered on the second ring. Breathless, probably running between meetings like she always did. She asked what was going on because my voice sounded different. I told her I was taking my grandmother to Paris for a while. She did not even question it, simply asked what I needed her to handle. That was Emily. No judgment, only action. I told her to make sure all our old files, especially the ones tied to our early years in the company, were backed up on secure drives that only we had access to. She asked if everything was all right. I said it would be, but there were things I needed to prepare for. She did not push. She just said she would take care of it and to call if I needed anything else. When I hung up, my phone buzzed again. This time it was a text from my mom. It said that they needed to talk about the wedding and that I was making things difficult. A second text followed before I could even put the phone down. It asked where I was. A third asked if I was coming home soon. Each message felt like a tap on a bruise. I slid the phone face down and let the silence return. The next morning, I helped Grandma dress, choosing a warm cardigan and the soft shoes she liked. She moved slowly, careful with each step, but there was a spark in her eyes I had not seen in years. She kept asking if she looked presentable, and I kept telling her she looked perfect. We left the house just after sunrise. The light was soft on the pavement. The sky a pale ribbon above the rooftops. I helped her into the car and folded her wheelchair into the trunk. As I slid behind the wheel, I noticed the quiet in my chest, like something heavy had finally gone still. The drive to JFK felt different from the drive to Albany. There was purpose in it, a sense of direction. Grandma stared out the window, taking in everything, whispering little comments about trees or clouds or billboards like she was, storing the world away. I think she had forgotten what it felt like to be going somewhere. When we pulled into the departure lane, her hand fluttered nervously against her lap. I got out, grabbed the wheelchair, and lifted her gently into it. She held onto my wrist for balance, her touch light but steady. Inside the terminal, people hurried past us with rolling suitcases and headphones in, the usual airport blur of motion and noise. I pushed her forward, the wheels humming softly against the tile floor. She tilted her head back to take in the high ceilings and the long lines of windows letting in the morning light. She asked in a small voice if we were really doing this. I leaned down slightly so she could hear me over the sound of the crowd. I told her that I had never been more certain of anything in my life. We reached the check-in desk, and I handed over our passports. The agent looked from me to Grandma with a polite smile. I could feel Grandma straighten a little in her seat, like she was trying to make herself worthy of this moment. When the boarding passes were printed, the agent placed them gently in my hand. 2 first-class seats to Paris. I glanced down at the names printed there, hers beside mine, and something in me tightened with a fierce kind of love. We went through security slowly, and every time someone rushed around us or sighed impatiently, I felt a flicker of anger I had to swallow down. Grand apologized each time she had to pause or adjust her feet, and I kept telling her she did not owe anyone speed or convenience. When we reached our terminal, I turned the wheelchair so she could see the view out the huge windows. The plane sat quietly on the runway, engines resting, silver in the morning sun. She stared at them like they were something holy. I asked her if she was all right. She nodded, but her voice trembled when she answered. She said this was the biggest thing she had done in years. She said she had never imagined she would leave the country again. She said she felt like a girl about to step into a dream she did not dare to believe. I knelt beside her so we were eye to eye. I told her that the world had spent enough time taking things from her. Now it was time to give something back. Her eyes softened, and she reached up, touching the side of my face with a hand that had soothed me through scraped knees and broken hearts. When our group was finally called to board, I took a breath and gripped the handles of her wheelchair. I felt her nerves through the tension in her shoulders. She whispered if I was sure about all of this. I told her I was more certain than I had ever been. As the gate agent opened the path to the jet bridge and people began gathering their bags, I pushed her forward. The wheels rolled smoothly beneath my hands. Ahead of us was the long tunnel to the plane, the air cooler there, the light softer. We moved slowly into it, leaving behind the noise of the terminal, heading toward a moment neither of us had ever imagined we would share. When the plane door came into view and the flight attendant smiled and welcomed us, I felt something inside me settle into place with a quiet finality. This was the beginning of something new, something neither of us owed an explanation for. And just as we reached the doorway, Grand rested her hand over mine and let out a breath that trembled, but did not break. Her hand rested over mine as we crossed the doorway, and I could feel every bit of her nerves and her excitement in that touch. The flight attendant greeted us with that polished airline smile, but when she saw my grandmother and the way she was looking around like a child in a storybook, something softer came into her eyes. We were shown to our seats near the front. The cabin felt almost unreal. Soft lighting, wide seats that looked more like small couches, little partitions for privacy. I helped Grandma ease herself into her seat, and she ran her fingers over the armrest and the small control panel with the wonder of someone who had spent most of her travel life in the back of a bus or squeezed into a coach. She murmured that it felt like a little room in the sky. Her voice was half awe, half disbelief. The flight attendant brought us glasses of sparkling water and hot towels, explaining in that gentle, practiced way where to store our bags and how the seat would turn into a bed later. Grandma watched every movement, committing it all to memory. When the plane started to taxi down the runway, she reached for my hand again, gripping it tightly. I could feel the faint tremble in her fingers. I asked if she was all right. She told me that she was not scared, just amazed that at this age, when she thought all her big firsts were behind her, she was sitting in first class on a flight to Paris. The engines roared louder, the plane gathered speed, and then we were pushed back into our seats as the ground dropped away. Grandma let out a small breath and laughed, a breathy, nervous laugh that turned into something freer as the city fell away, beneath the clouds. She had flown before when she was younger, but never like this, never with so much space to stretch and no one kicking the back of her seat. She spent the first hour exploring every little thing, the tray that folded out of the armrest, the storage compartment, the small light she could move with the touch of a finger. When the attendant brought menus, she opened hers cautiously, ran a hand over the heavy paper, and whispered that she had never been handed a menu on a plane before. We chose our meals together, something simple for her and something a bit fancier for me. And as the hours passed, the plane settled into that muffled, mid-flight calm. Lights dimmed. People tucked themselves under blankets. Screens glowed with movies and quiet maps of our progress across the ocean. At one point, after they had served dessert and cleared the plates away, Grand reclined her seat and pulled the blanket up to her waist. She lay there staring at the small window, at the darkness pressing against it. She turned her head toward me and asked why I was doing all of this. Her voice was not accusing, just genuinely curious. Like she could not quite understand how she had ended up here. I told her that for as long as I could remember, she had been the one person who saw me. Really saw me. Not the difficult daughter, not the intense one, just me. I told her that she had given me love when nobody else knew what to do with me, that she had believed in me when I was broke and exhausted and doubting. Everything. She shook her head and said she had only done what any grandmother who loved her grandchild would do. I smiled and told her that not everyone did, that I had heard enough stories to know that what she gave me was rare. Then I said the words that had been sitting in my chest since I booked the tickets. I told her that I was doing this because she deserved more. More than being asked to stay home so she did not ruin a photograph. More than being asked to sacrifice for the sake of appearances. More than being told to keep quiet for the family image. She blinked hard at that and turned her face back to the window. For a while we sat in silence, each with our own thoughts, the engine hum a steady backdrop. I watched her profile against the faint blue glow and wondered how many times, In her life, anyone had told her she deserved more than what she had been handed. When we landed at Charles de Gaulle, it was morning in Paris. The light had that soft gray quality I always associated with old photographs. The air in the jet bridge was cooler, carrying faint, unfamiliar scents. We made our way slowly through the airport, following signs, navigating elevators and ramps. People streamed past us with that same airport urgency, but every few steps, Grandma would squeeze my hand and point something out. A sign in French, a little bakery display, a child asleep on a suitcase. Custom took time, but we were waved through without much fuss, and soon, we were stepping out into a waiting car I had arranged ahead of time. The driver held a small card with my last name on it and smiled politely as he took our bags. Grandma watched the scene like she was in a movie, eyes wide, taking in every detail. The drive into the city was slower, caught in the morning traffic. Paris slid past the windows, all pale stone buildings and iron balconies, nature streets that seemed too small for modern cars. Gran kept saying that it looked exactly like in the postcards, and exactly. Nothing like them at the same time. When we pulled up in front of the hotel near Place de la Concorde, she went completely quiet. The building was tall and elegant, with a pair of glass doors and staff in perfectly pressed uniforms. I thanked the driver, then moved around to open the door for her. A bellman brought her wheelchair and held the door as I pushed her inside. The lobby was all marble floors and high ceilings, chandeliers casting warm light everywhere. She looked around as if she was afraid to even breathe too loudly. At the front desk, the clerk greeted us with a practiced warmth and spoke to my grandmother, directly, not over her head or past her. I watched Grandma relax just a touch at that. We checked in, and an attendant escorted us to the elevator, and then up to our suite. The room was even more beautiful than the photos. 2 big beds with crisp white linens, tall windows draped in heavy fabric, a seating area with armchairs, and beyond that, a small balcony. I wheeled Grandma toward it and opened the doors. The city sound rushed in, muted and alive, the square below busy with cars and people, fountains sending up thin sprays of water. She rolled to the edge and gripped the railing, staring out over the city. Her eyes were bright and wet and full of something that made my throat tight. She said that she had always wondered what this would be like, but had never said it out loud, because it felt silly to want something that big at her age. I told her that wanting something was never silly, that sometimes the world just tries to convince you it is, to keep you in your place. We spent the rest of that first day moving slowly, letting her body adjust. In the afternoon, after a short rest, we made our way to the Musée d'Orsay. I knew the ramp routes by heart from my planning, which entrances were accessible, which bathrooms had enough space. I had spent late nights making sure this trip would not be a struggle for her, every step of the way. Inside the museum, the old train station architecture arched above us, light spilling in from the big clock windows. We moved through galleries full of paintings she had only ever seen in books. She lingered in front of certain ones, tilting her head, study brush strokes, reading the little plaques slowly. At one painting, she reached out just a fraction, hand hovering in the air, and whispered that she used to have a small postcard of this taped inside her pantry door so she could look at it while she cooked. She said she never thought she would see the real thing. I watched her eyes, not the painting. There was a kind of quiet joy there that I wished I could have bottled, something deep and simple and entirely real. It was the kind of joy that had nothing to do with impressing anyone. That evening, I took her to a small restaurant near the Seine. It was not the fanciest place in the city, just a cozy spot with candles on the tables and a view through the windows of the river gliding by. The waiter helped me position her chair so she could see out. We ate slowly, talking about little things, the taste of the bread, the way the light from the street lamps reflected off the water. Every few minutes, she would stop and shake her head slightly, as if she still could not quite believe she was there. After dinner, we walked very slowly along the river, the wheelchair rolling smoothly over the pavement. The Eiffel Tower was visible in the distance, lit up against the darkening sky. When the lights began to sparkle, Gran let out a surprised laugh that made a couple walking past us turn and smile. She asked again, softly, why I was doing all this. I told her the same thing I had said on the plane, that she deserved more than survival, more than being treated like an afterthought, more even than loyalty to people who had not earned it. Back at the hotel later, in the soft light of the room. She drifted off to sleep quickly, exhausted in a good way. I stood by the window for a long time, watching the traffic circle below. The city felt like it was pulsing with a life completely separate from anything my family had ever tried to script. My phone, which I had mostly ignored since we left, lay on the small table by the window. I picked it up and opened the camera, flipping it to face us. I gently woke Grandma enough to wrap an arm around her shoulders and held the phone out. She smiled, a little confused but happy, and I captured the two of us with the city lights behind us. I opened the family group chat, the one that had been full of talk about wedding venues and flower colors and seating charts. Without letting myself overthink it, I selected the photo and attached it. In the text box, I wrote 3 simple words: "Greetings from Paris." Then I hit send. For a moment, nothing happened. The photo appeared, our faces small on the screen. The message sat there, quiet and unremarkable, just another bubble in a long chain of family updates. Then my phone buzzed once, twice, then again, over and over. Calls started flashing across the screen. My mom, my dad, my brother, all trying to connect at once, the little green and red buttons popping up, vibrating in my hand like an alarm. I let it buzz on the table and turned back toward the sleeping shape of my grandmother. Her breathing slow and even, the corners of her mouth still curved up from the last laugh she had given them. I stood there for a long time with the phone buzzing on the table, screen lighting up with call after call from home. It felt strange watching their names appear on the glass, while the only person who had ever truly made me feel at home slept a few steps away, finally at peace. I pressed the side button until the buzzing stopped and the room went quiet again. In the pale morning light that slipped around the edges of the curtains, I woke to the sound of traffic far below and the soft clink of a cup. Grandma was already up in her bed, the tray table in front of her with the remains of room service breakfast. She looked almost shy when she told me she had ordered coffee and a croissant, because it seemed like the right thing to do in Paris. I sat on the edge of her bed and asked gently how she had slept. She said that she had slept better than she had in years. Then she looked at me with a kind of quiet determination that I had not seen on her face before, and said that she wanted to set things straight while her head was still clear. I knew immediately what she meant. We sat together at the small desk by the window, the light falling across the keyboard of my laptop. I pulled up my email and found the address for Helen Brooks, the attorney who had handled my grandparents' paperwork for decades. Helen was based in Albany, but she worked with a regional firm now, and I knew she understood both the law and my family better than most. I typed a brief message explaining that we were in Paris and that my grandmother wanted to update her will and related documents as soon as possible. I hit send, and barely 10 minutes passed before my inbox chimed with a reply. Hello suggested a video call that afternoon, early morning for her in New York State. She also said she would record the session, take detailed notes, and prepare formal papers for signature as soon as Grandma was back home. When I read that aloud, Grandma nodded, her mouth set in a firm line. She told me she wanted her wishes on record, while nobody could claim she was confused or pressured. I assured her that Helen would make sure of that. The hours between breakfast and the call moved slowly. We kept the day gentle, just a short walk in the hotel corridor to stretch her legs, then tea by the window. Outside, the square was alive with cars and buses and people hurrying in every direction. Inside, it felt like we were sitting in a bubble of calm before a necessary storm. At the appointed time, I propped the laptop on the desk and adjusted it so the camera framed Grandma clearly, the Eiffel Tower just barely visible in the far distance through the glass behind her. I sat to one side, within reach but not in the center. When the little icon stopped spinning, Helen appeared on the screen, her familiar lined face framed by a bookshelf and the dull office light of early morning. She greeted my grandmother first, calling her Mrs. Cole in that respectful tone she always used. Then she smiled when Grandma insisted that if they were going to do serious business on another continent, she could at least call her Irene. I could see Helen watching closely, assessing her orientation, the clarity in her eyes, the ease with which she joked. Helen explained that she would be recording the call and making contemporaneous notes. She said that as long as my grandmother was acting of her own free will and understood the nature of her decisions. They could rely on this conversation as evidence of her intent. Final papers would be drafted and waiting for her signature as soon as she returned to Albany, and the video would be attached to the file. She asked Grandma to state her full name, her date of birth, and where she was. Grandma did so without hesitation. She even added that she was in Paris with her granddaughter, finally, and that she was perfectly aware of what she wanted to do with what little she had left. When Helen was satisfied, she asked gently what changes my grandmother wished to make. Grandma straightened a little in her chair. Her hands were folded in her lap, fingers laced together. The faint tremor in them stilled for the moment. She spoke slowly, but with a strength that surprised me. She told Helen that she wanted to remove both of her children, Richard and Carol, as beneficiaries of her estate. Her voice did not waver when she said their names. She paused just long enough for Helen to ask if she understood that this meant they would receive nothing from her directly. Grandma said that she understood and that it was intentional. She then said that she wanted the house in Albany, the one we were all raised visiting, to pass entirely to me. She used my full name, Rachel Cole, and looked directly into the camera as she said that I was the one who had shown up, the one who had cared for her without asking what was in it for me. She added that she wanted me to be able to decide what to do with the house, without interference, whether that meant living in it, renting it, or selling it. I felt my eyes sting, but I kept my face steady. Next, she said she wanted a small portion of her retirement account, 5%, to be set aside for a charitable donation. She looked over at me then, and told Helen that the specific organization would be my choice. But she preferred something that supported girls' education, or opportunities in science and technology. Helen nodded and wrote that down, saying they could draft the papers to give me discretion to choose the charity, consistent with those wishes. Then came the part that seemed to matter most to Grandma. She lifted her chin just a bit higher and told Helen that she wanted to designate me as the sole executor of her estate. No co-executor, no shared responsibility. She said plainly that she trusted me to handle things fairly and firmly, and that she did not wish any other family members to have legal authority to meddle or contest. Helen asked again if she understood what that rule meant. Grand answered that she understood exactly. She said she had watched too many wills turn into battlegrounds, and she did not want that for me. But if there was going to be a fight, she wanted me holding the sword. Finally, Grandma told Helen about the promissory note from 2009. She described the envelope, the amount, the signatures, the fact that no payments had ever been made. She wanted that paper listed formally as an asset of her estate, a debt owed not to her as a person, but to whatever legal entity she left behind. Helen asked me to hold the note up to the camera. I went to the suitcase, retrieved the tin where Grandma had carefully placed it before we left, and unfolded the document. I held it close enough for Helen to read the names and the amount. I could see her mouth tighten slightly as she recognized my parents' signatures. She said they would scan and reference the note as evidence of a personal loan not repaid, and that as executor, I would have the legal authority to decide whether to collect on it from any funds or property owed back to my parents. She added that they could build language into the will, clarifying that any such collection would not be considered vindictive, merely the settling of an outstanding obligation. Gran looked at me then in a way I will never forget. There was no apology in her eyes anymore, only resolve. She told Helen that she wanted it on record that I did not owe my parents that money. She said that if I chose to forgive the debt, that would be my gift, not an expectation. And if I chose to collect, I would be acting within my rights, not out of spite, but out of fairness. Then she turned her gaze fully on me. She told me that I did not owe them anything for what they took from both of them. Us. Not money, not silence, not loyalty. She said that if I wanted to demand that the loan be repaid, with interest or not, as executor, I had that right and that blessing from her. My throat felt tight. I could not trust my voice, so I simply nodded. Helen watched us both, her expression softening around the edges. She went over everything one more time, repeating back the main points, asking my grandmother to confirm after each item. Remove Richard and Carol as beneficiaries. Leave the Albany house entirely to Rachel. Allocate 5% of the retirement account to a charity Rachel chooses in line with her stated preferences. Appoint Rachel as sole executor. List the 2009 promissory note as an asset of the estate, collectible at the executor's discretion. Grant confirmed each point calmly, even when she said her children's names. When Helen finally closed her notebook and said she had everything she needed to draft the updated documents, Grandma let out a breath that sounded like something heavy sliding off her shoulders. Helen promised to send a summary by secure email within the day and to have the formal papers ready once Grandma returned home. She remarked the previous will was still technically in effect, but that this recording would carry significant weight if anything unexpected happened. After they said their goodbyes, the screen went dark, and I closed the laptop. For a moment, listening to the faint sounds of Paris below, Grandma looked smaller somehow, but not weaker, more like a tree that had just survived a storm and was still standing. Branches stripped, but roots deeper than anyone realized. She asked if I was angry with her for how long she had stayed silent. I told her no, that whatever she had done back then, she had done while carrying pressure I could barely imagine. I said that what mattered was what she had done today. Here, in this room. She reached for my hand again, and we sat like that. Two women in a hotel in a city that once only existed on postcards for us, claiming something nobody had expected us to claim. My phone, which had been blissfully quiet during the call, thanks to the Do Not Disturb setting, lit up as soon as I moved it. The screen filled with missed calls and messages. FaceTime requests from my mom, my dad, and my brother stacked on top of each other, like they were taking shifts trying to break through. I watched as another incoming video call flashed across the screen, my parents and brother together this time. I let it ring. It went to missed calls, and almost immediately started again. They were not going to stop. They had seen the photo from the night before. Now they were seeing that I was not playing along with whatever version of reality they were trying to sell. I turned the phone face down again. The sharp thrill of panic I might have felt years ago at ignoring them never appeared. In its place was a kind of cold, clear quiet. Then another notification slid across the top of the screen, different from the others. A message from a number I recognized but rarely saw. It was from Julia, my brother's fiancée. She said she needed to talk to me. Right now. I stared at the message for a long minute, the city moving quietly outside the window, while my phone sat hot in my hand. Part of me wanted to ignore it, to drop the whole thing into the same silence they had given me. But if there was one person in that whole setup who deserved to know what kind of man she was about to marry, it was her. I typed back 3 words. I can talk. Almost immediately, my screen lit up with an incoming FaceTime call. But it was not just from Julia. The caller ID showed the family group. They had looped her into their performance. I glanced over at Grandma. She was sitting in the armchair by the window, a shawl around her shoulders, watching the traffic like it was a movie. I told her softly that my parents were calling. She nodded, eyes steady. "Answer," she said. Her voice was calm. "Let us see what story they are telling today." I took a breath and tapped accept. Their faces snapped into focus. My mom and dad are on the couch in our old living room back in upstate New York. My brother Matt beside them, jaw tight. Standing behind the sofa were 2 people I recognized from photos. Julia and her father, a tall man with the stiff posture of someone used to boardrooms and golf courses. Her mother was just off to the side, half cut off by the frame. My mom's voice hit first, sharp and high. "Rachel Cole, why are you in Paris? Do you have any idea how this makes us look?" She did not ask how Grandma was. She did not ask if we had arrived safely. It was all image, as always. My dad leaned forward, his face already flushed. "You bring Mom back here," he barked, "right now. This is not funny. You had no right to run off with her." In the corner of the screen, I saw Julia, eyes flicking between them and me. She looked more confused than angry. She called my name, once, quietly. I did not raise my voice. I just held the phone steady and said that Grandma was fine, that she was with me, and that she had chosen to be here. I added that I was not going to argue about that. My mom scoffed. "You are doing this to punish us," she said, throwing money around, dragging my mother across the ocean, making a scene online. "Your cousin showed us that picture. What exactly are you trying to prove?" There it was again. the accusation, the assumption that everything I did was an attack on them. I felt that old, familiar anger pressing against my ribs, but instead of spilling out in words, it hardened into something else, something colder and clearer. I realized in that moment that explaining myself to them had never changed anything. They had always decided their version of the story before I even opened my mouth. So I stopped explaining. I told them to hold on. Then I set the phone on the desk, angled so they could see me, and flipped open my laptop. The screen lit with the folders I had prepared before we left. On impulse a few nights earlier, after Grandma first told me the truth, I had asked Emily to help me pull anything we could find connected to that old scandal. With a friend in legal tech and the kind of digital footprint people underestimate, it had not been hard. In one folder sat a scan of the promissory note from 2009, the one we had taken photos of before leaving Albany. In another was a forwarded email from the lawyer firm that had handled Matt's settlement back then. It was an old message that Grandma had once been copied on when they needed her bank routing information, buried for years in a forgotten email account she never used. With her permission, I had reset the password and retrieved it. Attached to that email, in grainy black and white, was a copy of the non-disclosure agreement the girl had been forced to sign. I opened a screen share from my laptop to my phone and accepted it. A second later, what was on my computer filled their screen as well. I saw my mom's eyes narrow, my dad's brows drawn together. Julia leaned in, trying to make sense of the sudden shift from living room to documents. The promissory note came up first. The words were simple. The amount, $32,000. The date, the signatures. Richard Cole. Elaine Cole. A promise to repay within 1 year. Nobody spoke. I let the silence stretch. Then I clicked to the next window. The old email from the attorney. It was dry, formal language, referencing funds wired to a young woman in exchange for a signed confidentiality agreement regarding her pregnancy and any claim of paternity. It mentioned Matt's name. It mentioned my parents. It mentioned my grandmother's account. Then I opened the attachment. The non-disclosure agreement appeared, dark and smudged in places, but clear enough. It laid out the terms. Money in exchange for silence. A promise never to contact Matt again. A waiver of any claim for child support. At the bottom, 3 sets of signatures. My brother, the girl, and my father as a witness. I did not narrate. I did not accuse. I just let them read. My mom was the first to break. "Where did you get that?" she snapped. Her voice had a wild edge I had never heard before. "You had no right to dig that up. That was handled years ago. It is none of your business." My dad said nothing. All the color had drained from his face. On the screen, Julia had gone very still. Her fingers tightened on the back of the couch until her knuckles turned white. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, but every word landed like a stone. "Matt," she said slowly, "is this real?" He swallowed hard. His mouth opened and closed once, twice. He started to say something about misunderstandings, about complicated situations, about how young he had been. The usual phrases came spilling out, the kind of lines you hear from men who have never really been forced to look at themselves. Julia did not look away from the screen. "So there was a girl," she said, still very calm, still very controlled, "and she was pregnant. And you all paid her to go away. And nobody thought to mention that to me. The woman you are asking to stand up in front of everyone and promise you forever." My mom tried to jump in, talking over her, saying that it had been blown out of proportion, that the girl had been unstable, that they had only been trying to protect Matt from being used. My dad's voice joined hers, louder, insisting that everything had been legal, that young people make mistakes, that it was history. I watched Julia while they talked. She glanced at the promissory note on the screen, at the lawyer email, at the NDA. Then she looked back at me. "You knew," she said, not accusing, just stating a fact. I nodded. I told her I had just learned the full truth from Grandma in Albany and that I had confirmed it with what records were still around. My mom spun on Grandma then, as if she were in the room with them instead of sitting quietly in a Paris hotel. "How could you?" she cried. After everything we have done for you, after all the sacrifices, you would turn on your own family like this?" Grandma, who had been silent until then, lifted her chin. Her voice was not loud, but it cut through the noise. "I am not turning on my family," she said. "I am refusing to keep lying for you. There is a difference." That shut my mother up for a beat. On the screen, Julia drew in a long breath and then stepped out from behind the couch so that her parents' faces came fully into view beside hers. Her father looked stunned. Her mother looked deeply unhappy in the way of someone realizing her carefully curated future for her daughter might not be as secure as she thought. Julia looked at Matt again. "You told me your family had never had any serious scandals," she said. "You told me you were drama-free. You told me you had no secrets." Matt stammered that it had been years ago, that he had been a stupid kid, that it had meant nothing. He said the girl had agreed to the arrangement. He started to say that he had planned to tell Julia someday when the time was right. She cut him off with a small motion of her hand. "We need to talk," she said, her voice suddenly very quiet and very sharp. "Now." She turned to her parents and asked them to end the call. My mom started to protest, saying that they were all family now, that whatever needed to be discussed should be handled together. My dad tried to regain control, saying that it was not the time that they had a rehearsal to think about. But Julia did not look at them. She kept her eyes on me for one last second, and in that look there was something like gratitude and something like grief. Then her father reached forward, his expression grim, and the screen flickered as someone hit the button to disconnect. The last thing I saw before the call dropped was my brother's face, open-mouthed, caught between outrage and fear, as the world he thought he had locked down began to crack. As the screen went black, I sat there with the phone in my hand, heart pounding but strangely steady. It felt like we had just pulled the tablecloth out from under a very expensive, very fake centerpiece. Some of the china had cracked. It was always going to. For a minute, there was nothing but the sounds of Paris outside the window and the faint click of the heater. Grandma watched me over the top of her glasses, waiting to see whether I would shake or crumble or explode. I did none of those things. I just breathed. Then the phone started again. Ping after ping. Another FaceTime request from the family group. Then another. The names stacked on the screen like a chorus line. Mom, Dad, Matt, and now Julia again. I thought about ignoring it. Let them stew. Let them try to build a new story without me. But there was something in the way the calls came, one right after the other, like waves hitting a seawall. It told me this was not just my parents trying to regain control. The other family was involved now, too. I glanced at Grandma. She gave me a small nod, the kind you give a boxer between rounds. I tapped accept. The picture jumped, then settled. This time, the camera was not in my parents' living room. It was in the banquet room of the country club where the rehearsal dinner was supposed to happen that night. I recognized the chandeliers from the pictures my mom had sent me earlier in, the year when she still believed I would show up, silent and helpful. People were everywhere in the frame. My parents at one end of a long table, my dad flushed and sweating, my mom with her mouth pressed into a thin line that tried to look dignified and failed. Matt was standing behind his chair, tie loose, one hand dug into his hair. On the other side sat Julia and her parents, both of them stiff and pale. A couple of other relatives hovered in the background, faces unhappy, eyes flicking to the phone and then away again. The sound hit me in a rush. Everybody seemed to be talking at once. My mom was insisting that the past was the past. Matt was saying something about being young and making mistakes. Julia's mother was using phrases like lack of transparency and serious trust issues, the kind of language you hear in corporate damage control meetings, not wedding rehearsals. I held the phone steady and did not say anything. After a few seconds, Julia saw me and told everyone else to stop. Her voice was not loud, but there was steel in it. The room quieted a little. She looked at me through the screen and asked, very calmly, how long I had known about all of it. I told her I had only learned the full story a few days earlier in Albany, and that I had brought proof, because I was tired of watching them pretend their problems did not exist. My mom jumped in, her voice rising. She said I was exaggerating, that I was always dramatic, that I was using old mistakes to blow up my brother's life because I was jealous. Julia's father cut across her words, his own voice sharp. He asked my parents when exactly they had planned to mention that there might be a young woman out there with ties to their son, and possibly a child who had been quietly bought out of the picture. He also asked why no one had disclosed any of this when the families had sat down with the pastor for counseling. My dad tried to act wounded, saying it had all been handled years ago, that the girl had agreed to the arrangement, that it was a private family matter, not anyone else's business. He kept glancing at me. Like if he could catch my eye, he could pull me back into the old role, the one where I smoothed and softened and took the blame when everything went sideways. I did not look away from the screen, but I did not give him that out either. In the middle of all of this noise, I heard a sound I knew too well, the small, cleared throat Grandma used when she was done being ignored. She gestured for me to tilt the phone, and I did. Her face moved into the frame, framed by the soft light of the hotel room. Paris behind her in a blur of stone and glass. The room on their end went abruptly quiet. My mom's hand flew to her mouth. My dad actually took a step back, like he had seen a ghost, instead of the woman he had been trying to keep out, of his own son's wedding photos. Gran's voice was calm, not loud, not trembling. She said she had stayed quiet for 15 years, that she had done what they asked, for the sake of the family image, for the sake of keeping the peace. Then she said she was not going to stay quiet for one more minute. The words hung there between Albany, upstate New York, and Paris, heavy and sharp. Julia's mother looked at her husband. Then she looked at Julia. Her voice, when she spoke, was low but firm. She said that a wedding was about joining two families, and that you could not build something strong on lies and omissions. She said she was not comfortable moving forward with a ceremony of this size and visibility when basic truths had been hidden from them. She used that phrase again, lack of transparency. It sounded so clinical, but you could hear the anger underneath it. Julia kept her eyes on Matt. She asked him, clearly, if there was anything else she should know. Anything at all. He shook his head, his face tight, insisting that there was nothing else, that it was over, that he was not that person anymore. There was a long pause. You could almost see her weighing everything in front of everyone. The dress, the deposits, the guests already in town, the years of planning, the image her parents cherished, and then the face of the man who had not thought she deserved the truth. She said that she could not walk down the aisle tomorrow like nothing had happened, that she needed time, that she needed space to think. She said she was not calling the engagement off yet, but she was not willing to pretend for one more minute that everything was fine. Then she did something that stunned everyone into silence. She walked closer to the phone so that her face filled the screen. She looked directly at me and said, "Thank you, Rachel." Not loudly, not theatrically, just sincerely. Then she stepped back, turned to her parents, and asked them to leave with her. Her mother nodded. Her father gave a short, tight nod to the camera, then followed his wife and daughter out of frame. Somewhere off to the side, a door opened and closed. The reaction on my family's side was instant and ugly. My mom started crying loud, messy sobs, saying that everything was ruined. My dad shouted that this was exactly what happens when private things are dragged out into the open, that I had taken something that had been handled and turned it into a spectacle. He kept repeating that word, handled, like paperwork had ever fixed a broken promise. Other voices chimed in around the edges, aunts and uncles and cousins, who had been hovering just off screen. Some of them scolded me. Some of them sounded more scared than angry. That was the thing about the truth. It does not just split the people at the center. It shakes everyone who is comfortable believing the polite version of events. In the middle of all of this, Grandma spoke again. She did not raise her voice. She just reminded them that nobody had forced Matt into that original decision, or my parents into theirs. That delayed consequences were still consequences. That was when my mom snapped. She leaned toward the phone, tears streaking her face, and screamed my name. She said I had to fix this, that I owed them, that after everything they had done for me, after all the sacrifices, the least I could do was help put this back together. She talked about the money spent, the relatives who had traveled, the reputation at stake in town. It was always that. Reputation. Image. The shiny picture. She repeated again that I owed them, as if the $32,000 they still had not repaid, the years of being the family scapegoat, the way they had struck my name off their guest list, had somehow been me running up a tab. I felt something quiet and finally settled inside me. I thought about the promissory note, about the updated will sitting in Helen's drafts, about Grandma's hand in mine when she told me I did not owe them my silence or my loyalty anymore. I looked at their faces on the screen, twisted with outrage and panic. I looked at my grandmother beside me, calm for the first time in years. And for once, I did not try to soothe anything. I did not argue. I did not defend myself. I did not apologize. Without a single word, I moved my thumb to the red button on the screen. Then I ended the call. I sat there with the phone still warm in my hand, the silence in the room spreading out like ripples. Ending that call should have left me shaky or guilty, but all I felt was an unexpected lightness, like a weight I had carried for years had slipped off my shoulders without warning. Gran watched me with a softness in her eyes, her hands folded neatly in her lap. After a moment, she murmured that I had done the right thing, that sometimes truth had to be said louder than comfort. Outside, Paris kept moving. Cars circled the square with steady rhythm, and people walked with the brisk purpose of a city used to cold afternoons. Nothing around us acknowledged the fact that thousands of miles away, a wedding was beginning to crumble. That thought made me almost laugh. The world was big. My parents had acted like their version of reality was the only one. It never had been. For a while, we just existed quietly in the room. I made tea and brought Grandma the cardigan she liked. My phone lay on the desk, screen dark. Then, like a storm cloud rolling back in, it buzzed. And buzzed again. I tried ignoring it, but the vibration turned into a continuous tremor on the wood. I finally picked it up. There were messages from a cousin, Tracy, someone who loved family drama almost as much as she loved being the first to spread it. She had tagged me in something on Facebook, so I opened it reluctantly. There it was, the Paris photo, the one of me and Grandma smiling with the city glowing behind us, but she had reposted it publicly with the caption, "Look who decided to skip the wedding chaos." That alone would not have caused trouble, but the comments underneath had exploded. Someone asked what chaos was. Another cousin chimed in, saying there had been shouting at the rehearsal dinner. Someone else hinted about an old scandal. Then I saw the word pregnancy rumor, then hush money, then cover up. And running through the whole comment thread was a single sentence repeated in various forms. The groom hid a scandal. Rumors move fastest in small towns, but in our family, gossip moved like gasoline on a spark. And it was spreading. I scrolled lower. More screenshots from people on Julia's side. A relative of hers wrote that her parents had pulled all their financial support for the wedding until things were clarified. Someone else mentioned that Julia had left the rehearsal dinner early with her mom and dad. I let my head fall back against the chair and closed my eyes. This was not what I wanted, but part of me knew it was inevitable. You hide something for 15 years and build a wedding on top of it. Eventually, the ground shifts. The phone buzzed again. This time it was my mom calling directly. I almost let it go to voicemail, but I felt something inside me shift. I had spent a lifetime avoiding confrontation, smoothing things over, letting my parents bend the truth while I stayed quiet. If I avoided this call, I would still be that version of myself. I did not want to be her anymore. I answered. My mother's face appeared, puffy and red from crying. She did not waste a second. "Rachel, you have to fix this. You have no idea how bad this is. The wedding is falling apart. Julia's family has backed out. They are talking about postponing or canceling entirely. They think we lied to them. You need to fix this." I kept my voice even and asked her what exactly she thought I was supposed to fix. She said I needed to call Julia and tell her that Grandma was confused, that I misunderstood the documents, that the NDA was old and did not mean what it looked like. She said to protect the family reputation. I almost laughed at that word, reputation. My parents had always cared more about that than anything real. I told her calmly that I was not going to lie. Not for Matt, not for her, not for anyone. Her voice cracked. She said I was punishing them, that I was jealous, that Grandma had turned me against them. She swung between sobbing and attacking so fast it made my head spin. Then she tried being gentle, reminding me of everything they had done for me, painting a picture where I owed them loyalty. It was the same script I had heard all my life. I did not let it work this time. I told her that I did not owe anyone anything for the pain they caused or money they borrowed and never repaid. I told her this situation was happening because of choices they made 15 years ago, and the way they handled things 2 weeks ago when they told Grandma she would ruin wedding photos. That one hit her hard. Then my dad's voice came through, sharp and furious. He accused me of manipulating Grandma Will. He said he knew she was planning to change it, and that I was behind it. He said I was taking advantage of her age. That accusation made something cold move through me. I told him that Grandma's decisions were her own, made clearly and calmly, during a recorded session with her attorney. I said that if he wanted to challenge her choices, he needed to talk to her, not attack me. There was a long pause. I could hear them both breathing, angry and uncertain. Then my mom said something I never expected. Her voice dropped to a scared whisper. "Rachel," she said, "please tell me she is not really cutting us out of the will. We helped her. We supported her. That house was supposed to be part of our retirement." I almost pitied her. Almost. I told her that Grandma had every right to leave her home to whomever she wanted. That she had decided to leave it to me because I had been there for her, because I had not used her, because she trusted me. And if they wanted to talk about fairness, they should start with paying back the debt they owed her. My dad exploded then. He shouted that I was destroying everything, that I had poisoned the family. He said the wedding falling apart was my fault, that Julia parents backing out was my fault, that the gossip online was my fault. I looked out the window at Paris glowing under a soft evening haze. At that moment, I realized something simple and liberating. For the first time in my life, none of their chaos belonged to me. When he finally stopped yelling, I said quietly that I hoped someday they understood this was not revenge. It was the truth and consequences. Then I hung up. The room went very still again. I took a deep breath and set the phone down. I turned toward Grandma. She was watching me with a calm I could not begin to describe. Not pride exactly, not sadness, something steadier than both. I sat beside her on the edge of her armchair. The light from the window hit her face in a soft, warm way. I could see the years etched around her eyes, the tenderness that had always lived there, the quiet grief that came from loving a family that did not always love each other well. My voice dropped to something quiet and real. "Grand," I asked, "are you all right?" She looked at me for a long moment, and her answer came slowly, with the weight of decades behind it. And before she could finish the thought, a fresh burst of notification sounds spread across my phone again, lighting up the dark screen like sparks. The fallout was still unfolding. I turned my head slightly toward the sound, then back to her, waiting for her answer. The question hung in the air between us, full of everything we had lived through, and everything still coming. The notification sounds finally faded into a dull silence, like the storm had spent itself for a moment. Gran shifted in her chair and looked at me with those steady eyes that had carried more truth than anyone else in my life. I asked her if she was all right, and she gave a small, thoughtful smile, the kind that came from someplace deep and honest. She said she had carried this weight for so long that letting it out felt strange. Almost like learning to breathe again. Then she reached for my hand, squeezed my fingers, and told me that she was more than all right. She said she was proud of me. The words were quiet, but they settled into me like something warm. The next morning, Paris woke with a soft gray light drifting over the rooftops. I pushed the curtains open and let the cool air in through the cracked window. Down on the street, the city moved with its usual rhythm. Delivery bikes, early commuters, the smell of fresh bread slipping in from the bakery across the square. For the first time in days, my shoulders felt loose, like the tightness had finally started to melt away. Grandma was already dressed when I turned around. She was slower that morning, but her face had color, and her eyes had a spark I had not seen in years. She told me she felt like having breakfast out, Someplace simple, someone with real coffee and a little plate of fruit. So I helped her into her chair, and we left the hotel together, rolling across the cobblestones toward a small cafe tucked between two tall buildings. Inside, the tables were small and round, the chairs mismatched in a way that made the whole place feel like a grandmother's kitchen. We sat near the window, the morning breeze brushing through the open door. The server brought us 2 café au laits and warm bread. Grand held the cup in both hands, warming her fingers. For a while, we just ate and listened to the soft hum around us, letting the quiet settle. Then she looked at me with that gentle seriousness she saved for moments that mattered. She said I had not been chasing revenge. I had simply stopped letting them hurt me. She said there was a difference. Revenge claws at people. What I had done was draw a line. She said most people never learn to do that in their whole lives. I took a slow breath and let her words sink in. Maybe she was right. Maybe the real shift had not been the scandal or the wedding falling apart or the money or the documents. Maybe the real shift was that for the first time, I had refused to play the role they had written for me. I told her I felt strangely calm, like I had finally stepped into a life that belonged to me. Not one built on their expectations or their scripts, but mine. She nodded and set her cup down. She said that was what she had wanted for me all along. Not success or wealth or some perfect image, just the ability to choose myself without apology. After breakfast, we strolled slowly toward the river. The air was cool and bright, and the city seemed soft around the edges. Grandma watched the boats drift beneath the bridges and said she never imagined she would see any of this. She was still taking it in, every building, every sound, every smell. As we rested on a bench facing the water, I felt my phone buzz again. This time I checked it. There were messages from my parents, all caps. Then a second message, longer and panicked. Then a third. The theme was the same. Everything was my fault. They had lost everything because of me. The wedding venue, the money, the trust of Julia family, their reputation, their plans. I read them all in silence, the words piling up like a wall of desperation. For a second, I felt that old impulse to soothe, to explain, to defend, the instinct I had lived with since childhood, the one that always put my needs last. But it passed. I typed slowly, making sure every letter was mine. You did not lose everything because of me. You lost everything because you lied. I hit send and put the phone back into my bag. It did not buzz again. For a long moment, I watched the water curve under the bridge. Then I looked at Grandma and told her the decisions I had made. I told her that I would honor her choices exactly as she stated with Helen. The will would stay exactly as she wanted. No negotiations, no backing down. I told her that once she passed, I would follow through on the loan. Legally, respectfully, without spite. They had signed the paper. It was a debt owed to her estate, and as executor, it was my job to carry out her wishes. It was not about punishing them. It was about closing a chapter they had left open for too long. I told her that I would not go to the wedding. Not the rescheduled version. Not the salvaged version. Not any version of it. Weddings were supposed to be celebrations of truth and commitment. There was no space for me there, and no reason to pretend otherwise. And finally, I told her that I was not flying back to Albany right away. I wanted to let the dust settle. I wanted her to enjoy Paris without the weight of my parents' voices echoing in her ear. We would go home when it felt right, not when they demanded it. Grandma listened to each decision with that quiet, steady expression. When I finished, she nodded once and said, "Good." Not harshly, not bitterly, just firmly, like someone closing a door that had been open too long. She looked out over the water again. Then she asked me something soft and unexpected. She asked what I wanted my life to look like now, without them orchestrating it, without their expectations wrapping around everything I did. I sat back on the bench and let myself imagine it. A life built around real relationships. A life where I did not look over my shoulder waiting for approval. A life where success did not have to be performed for people who never appreciated it. A life where love and loyalty actually meant something. I told her I was not sure yet, but I was starting to feel free enough to find out. Later that afternoon, we walked slowly back to the hotel. We passed a little shop with postcards in a spinning rack outside the door. Grand asked me to stop so she could look through them. She picked one with a painting she had seen at the museum the day before. She said she wanted to keep it where she could see it, not taped inside a pantry this time, but framed on her nightstand when we got home. As we rode the elevator up to our floor, she rested her head back and closed her eyes. She whispered that truth always arrives at the time it is meant to, sometimes early, sometimes late, but always when you are finally ready to carry it. When we reached the room, she asked if we could open the balcony doors one more time. I did, and the city air filled the room. She sat near the railing, listening to the soft hum of Paris in the evening, the heartbeat of a place that had given her something she thought she had lost. Hope. Space. A new beginning in an old life. I stood beside her for a long time, taking in the view, feeling the shift inside me settle like a stone in still water. This was the first day of a life that I had chosen, and as the lights of the city began to glow against the fading sky, I knew that I would never go back to being invisible again. If you have ever been told you were too much or not enough for your own family, remember this: silence can be power, and truth can be the loudest revenge. Tell me in the comments what integrity means to you and where you are listening from.